Now that we have transmutation stones in Rise of Kingdoms, you might be excited to go and re-roll the attributes on some of your legendary inscribed armaments, if you even have some of those, in order to get better armaments overall and to get nice gains in stats. But what if I told you the chances of getting your desired stat are not the same for each armament type? That's right, it turns out the probabilities are different, and I can show you exactly what they are, because there is an official Rise of Kingdoms website that will tell you the exact chances of getting a good stat for each armament and each slot. And the significance here is very dramatic. It has a huge impact on which armaments are actually the very best to use your transmutation stones on. So stick around in this video for the very important conclusions around which armaments are actually worth re-rolling and which ones you should perhaps deprioritize. Let's get going. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and I've got to give a big shout out at the start of this video to another content creator, and that is Chisgule. Chisgule showed this website in one of his videos. It's an official Rise of Kingdoms Lilith website that shows the probability of many things, like what are the chances you even get an inscription at all, and more importantly, what are the chances you get your desired stat on the armament of your choice. So in this video, we'll make this very simple. This might look a little complicated, but we will draw very simple conclusions right away that lets you know, hey, these are the armaments I should go re-roll, and these are the ones I should pump the brakes on. And if that's the sort of thing that sounds helpful to you, consider subscribing to the channel and throwing a like on the video. Also consider checking out Chisgule. His channel will be linked in the description. Now let's jump back in game, and I will give you the conclusions up front, and then we'll do the work to arrive at those conclusions, because a lot of people, hey, they're like, yo, I don't need to see the work. Just tell me what you think's the best, brother. So if we go to your armaments, I will draw several important conclusions. The first conclusion is that your best chances of getting a good, favorable re-roll, or even roll in the first place, is going to be in the upper left and the upper right. The probability is actually just better for getting good stats in the upper left, that is called the scroll slot, and the upper right, that is the instrument slot. However, there is a difference between these two slots, and I will argue the instrument is the best place to break ground with your re-rolls. Why is that? Well, the scroll slot is sort of unique. You see, getting any inscription in Rise of Kingdoms is extremely rare, except for the scroll slot. If I show you my restart account, which is in KVK right now, you can choose an inscription as your KVK reward every single time you go into KVK when you're in Season 4 and beyond. So because you can build your own good, legendary, inscribed armaments, I will make the argument that re-rolling the attributes on those should be a lower priority, because you could just make your own later, and you could make better ones. So I'll show you right over here. We'll jump right into the shop, okay? And in the shop, I can show you, boom. Even if you do not get selected in the 240 or 300 people that get an, autarch limited reward, even just getting these rewards down here is really gangbuster. And like, yeah, to put 3.5% health on an armament, bro, you can freaking build a bear your own damn armament that's going to be really good. And, you may or may not get lucky with your armaments. Like my restart account somehow got really lucky with this one over here, right? Even if you're building ones that are otherwise, not the best rolls on stats, you can still build a damn armament every KVK at the cost of 1 conquest coin. And to me, that tells me that your statistically best route to go is going to, again, be the instrument slot, upper right. So if you were wondering where to start, it's probably there. Now, when you look at, okay, so if I'm starting with instruments, like which ones do I do? That's when you're going to have to use your own judgment to look at the sort of inscriptions that you have and which ones ultimately are doing the sort of best effects based on your marches, okay? And, it'd be a much longer video to go in and prioritize every single damn, inscription there is and to figure that out. But the instrument slot has the best chance of giving you a good result. I think that's a good place to start. And remember that it gets very expensive to lock attributes. It goes from 1 transmutation stone to lock nothing to 3 transmutation stones to lock 2 things. And if I wanted to do, this particular armament and keep the cavalry stats, that's 5 transmutation stones. Bro, that's too expensive. These transmutations, these transmutations are way too expensive to use on an item like this. So I think you've got to do some assessment around which of these items are even worth locking stuff on. And I'll say, for example, this one, if I was really hyped about Spirited, doing, 5% extra damage when I'm over 70% rage, I would probably lock none of these attributes. Even though Cav health is desirable, this rolled at 1.5%. That is the lowest possible roll. And it's too expensive to try to lock to keep such a low roll. So if it's low, I would not lock it. Unless it's like a double inscription armament and you're really trying to shoot the moon, maybe you lock it, maybe. All right. So the instrument is probably your best place to start. But what is the next main principle about which armament to go and do this on? Well, the next important thing to keep in mind is, let's say you have multiple marches of infantry, or multiple marches of cavalry, or multiple marches of archers. Should you work on your best infantry set or your worst infantry set and try to get some improvement? And although it might be tempting to say, hey, this is my worst infantry set, I'd like to improve it, okay? Look at this. It'd be so easy to use some transmutation stones and do better than just this 2.4% health, probably. But probably it's easy to do better, okay? Because I got 2 spots where I could do better. Heck, I could just take some of these armaments and just start re-rolling everything on them, and I might do better, right? Use 1 transmutation stone at a time, and maybe I end up somewhere better. The thing about working on your worst set is that you're also getting armaments other ways. Remember, you're still going to be getting armaments in an ongoing basis in more places than ever. Even the events now have more armaments. For example, the Civilization event series that shows up, you may have noticed that for 2 of these, depending on what civilization is here, it's Arabian scimitars now, you can get a random armament chest. So there's more ways than ever, even though it's not that plentiful, there's more ways than ever to get these armament crates. So I will make the argument that because you get new armaments all the time, even though you might be able to get more stats by working on your second best set or your third best set, you're better off just working on one very best set. And the reason is that if you then later obtain an armament that would have replaced your best set armament, well, then your best set armament moves down to your second best set, and your second best set gets turned into trash. So if you're spending these transmutation stones making your second best or third best march better, you're probably doing it wrong, because even though you might gain the most stats now, your goal should not be to use these expensive items on something you're going to replace. Your goal should be to make items that are very long lasting. And that kind of sucks because it's going to take a lot of transmutation stones to work on things that are nearly perfect. And let me show you an example of that back to the main account, okay? So, there's so many factors to think about, and you got to make your own choices here. And I'm only going to give you more considerations. So, look, this is even the conclusions. We haven't even jumped into the data yet, which is going to be important. But the thing that I think you want to work on is these main sets. And even though I just finished telling you that the scroll slot is like probably not where you should work, because even though your chances are good, you can build your own armaments there, I just want to point out to you that there is one inscription that is God tier, even though it's not a special inscription. And I have one of these. Let's see, where is it hiding? I think I've got it over here. This breaker inscription, if you have one of these, you should probably re-roll the stats and then put it on something. Why? Breaker is one of the only inscriptions in the game that is a debuff. And a debuff scales with the number of marches hitting the same target as you. Okay? So if you have a breaker inscription, which I think is only available in the scroll slot, you probably should re-roll this and use your transmutation stones, because breaker is insane. If you have 5 marches hitting the target, they all take advantage of the fact that your enemy now has 15% less defense. If you have 7 marches even better. If you're teaming up with a friend and the two of you with your 10 marches hit the same thing, even better. If you're swarming a flag, 12 things all benefit, right? If you're swarming a rally, okay, or a counter rally, your every single thing hitting is getting the benefit of this defense reduction. And I think this thing is secretly cracked. So this would be a priority. Double inscriptions, depending on what you got over here, could be a priority. You can see I took one reroll on this and I'm like, ooh, I did get infantry attack. Do I lock the infantry attack? Do I lock the cav defense? Do I just keep rolling on this one with one transmutation stone? Yo, it's a double inscription. These are hard to come by. But like, how good is 2.5% extra skill damage and 1.5% normal attack damage when winning a KVK can get you an inscription with 10% skill damage, right? So I have some choices to make here. And you can see as we talk about this, why it ends up being so much more complicated than you would think. And on the topic of getting complicated, I think we can summarize all our conclusions so far and look at the data. And my conclusion so far is your best chances are in the upper right slot. I think you want to work on your best set of armaments and making it better rather than elevating your worst armaments to not suck as much. Because eventually when you get better ones, those will be replaced. Whereas your best of the best, you'd still have them around. Okay? And I also think you probably want to skip the scroll where you can unless you have the breaker inscription. The breaker inscription is cracked, but otherwise you're going to be building your own scroll inscriptions, one per KVK. And you might even take the stance of trying to find armaments like this one, put your inscription on it, if it's the best that you've got, and then try to re-roll that. And that I think would be reasonable and understandable. So with all those conclusions drawn, now let's talk about what's going on with your emblems, the bottom left, and your flags, the bottom right. Because I don't know about you, but I felt like I was getting worse results on these, and it turns out statistically you will. It's just actually the math. And the emblems for me are the absolute damn worst on all my accounts. Turns out that's because of the way they're designed. That is literally by design. So let's look at the data here, and let me show you this, okay? So this data, website linked in the description, shows you the probability for each slot of getting your desired stat. And that is different for whether or not you're working on a scroll, that's the upper left. I'm mirrored here, the upper left, right? The instrument, which is the upper right, the emblem, which is the bottom left, and the flag, which is the bottom right, okay? So slot 1, that's your first attribute, which is hopefully attack. If you're working on a scroll or an instrument, you got a 17% chance of getting your desired stat, okay? Whether that's infantry, archers, or cavalry. For defense, in slot 2, 17% chance of getting your desired stat. Slot 3, 17% chance of getting health for either infantry, archers, or cavalry. And you even have on top of that, 3.2% chance of getting all damage. So you have a net of like 20.2% chance of getting something good in that fourth slot, which is kind of cool. So for your instrument and your scroll, hey, things are looking good, baby. Things are looking up. I mean, compared to what I'm about to show you anyways, which is the flag. The flag, which is that bottom right armament, you only have a 14.72% chance of getting an attack stat that you wanted. And that's less than 17, okay? The same is true for defense. That's slot number 2. And the same is true for slot 3, where you have, well, actually, I don't know. Hey, I take it back. For your flag, slot 3 is looking good. It's the same as it was for the other spots, okay? For the instrument and the scroll. 3.2% chance of all damage, 17% chance of health. That's actually the same. Now, the reason, however, why slot 1, which is attack, and slot 2, which is defense, has a chance of being worse, is because you could get march speed. And you may say, well, Chisgule, hey, it ain't so bad to get up to 3.5% march speed. And I will say, yeah, no, it actually is really bad. Why is it really bad? I got to jump in game to show you this, okay? But when we jump in game, one concept in gaming is called itemization, right? And itemization, I don't want to get too in-depth on this, but you got to have some standard of reference, some comparison point. And if we look at talent points, I can use one talent point, one itemization point, okay, to get 1% of stats over here. That's pretty good. 1.1% of stats. Well, 1 point also gets me 3% of march speed. You see the problem? So if we pull back 3.5 march speed, that's like 1 itemization point of goodness. Whereas if I get 3.5% of health, which is what you could get in that same spot, or I guess it would be defense or attack, that's like 3.5 itemization points of goodness. All that to say, march speed bad, stats good. Okay. And hey, the march speed's better than siege stuff, right? But you generally would much rather have the defense or the attack rather than the march speed on your armaments. So that's why your odds of getting something good is lower. Because if you really are trying to optimize, okay, you're now counting on the 14.72% chance of getting defense. Technically speaking, your chances of getting something relevant, if you're going for archers, okay, or if you're going for infantry or cavalry, your chance of getting something relevant is higher because at least the march speed is relevant. But I mean, I think we're trying to go for the stats, and the stats you want, it's just not march speed, okay? And then when we look at the emblem spot, this is the worst chances of all, okay? This is your worst odds of getting something good. And you have only a 13.01% chance of getting your desired attack stat. You have a 13.01% chance of getting your desired defense stat. And you have a 13.01% chance of getting your desired health stat, and only 2.4% chance of getting your desired all damage. So this is not looking good for the emblem. The emblem is far and away the worst spot in terms of the probabilities of getting your desired stats. Now, my stance on this one is that if all my emblems are my worst, and I'm all about getting more stats, although my chances are lower of getting better stats, some of the easiest improvements I can make is actually just in my emblems. So in some ways, just like re-rolling emblems and using only 1 inscription stone per is a really interesting way to get some gains. But that goes counter to the principle I shared earlier, which is that in a perfect world, you always work on your best set and make that best set even better. Because at some point, you could just luck your way into a new armament that replaces what you have. And most of us will not shoot the moon, okay? And it won't happen very often. But what are the chances of getting a good armament anyways? This is where we need to differentiate between the legendary special inscriptions and the regular inscriptions. And what I found really interesting is that for each slot, the chances are different. So we need to look at this. For a legendary scroll, that is the upper left slot, you have a 0.62% chance of getting a legendary inscription. So if you get an inscription, which is already rare as hell, 1 in 200 of your inscribed armaments, and the odds are slightly better than that, but like 1 in 200 is going to have a special inscription. 92.27% chance, 92.27% of the time, if you get a legendary inscription on a scroll, it's just a regular inscription. And 7.1% of the time, if you get an inscription at all, you actually end up with 2 of them. So that's really interesting. If you get an inscription, it's like 1 in 15 of those will end up with a second inscription, okay? Now, if we look at the upper right slot, that's the instrument, the chances are the same. But if we look at the flag, hold up, wait a minute. The chances are different. You have a much lower chance of getting a special inscription on a flag. Well, wait a minute. And your chances of getting a non-special inscription is also not great, 96.13. Technically, it's actually much higher that you just get 1 non-special inscription, and that comes at the cost of getting fewer double inscriptions. So this means that if you have a double inscription on your flag slot, that is much more rare. Those are much more worth being very careful with, okay? Much better to be careful. So this does not influence your chances of getting a legendary inscribed armament. This is saying if you get an inscription for your flag, okay, you have a much lower chance of getting that double inscription. So be super careful with double inscriptions and be ultra careful with your special inscriptions if you ever get one of those on the flag spot. And if we look at the emblem spot, it's the same calculus. You're far less likely to get a special inscription on the emblem. So if you get one of those, whoo, you take good care of that thing, okay? And if you get a double inscription, that was even more rare. Man, you take good care of that thing. Those are hard to come by. So your flags and your emblems are where you are just far less likely to get good stuff. And because you're far less likely to even get a 2 inscription or get a special inscription, I mean, if you get one of those, that seems like a really high priority to use these transmutation stones and end up with something hopefully really exceptional, even though your chances are lower of getting your desired stats, which is really interesting. When it comes to the probabilities of getting an inscription at all, and getting a legendary armament at all, those are listed here. And they're now actually available in-game, which I love that you can see these probabilities in-game. That's quite nice. All in all, what are Chisgule Gaming's conclusions here about what the heck should I use these transmutation stones on, okay? So we jump back in-game, and we can summarize all our findings. And the summary is as follows, okay? Your best chances of getting an improvement is on the top 2 spots. That's your best chances. But also remember, your chances of getting good stats is also worse on these bottom 2. So if you want to take the strategy of saying, I want the best odds of getting a good reroll, do your upper right. You could also do your upper left, but keep in mind, you can build your own armaments over here, 1 per KVK. Now, if you want to take the strategy of improving the armaments that are hardest to get good rolls on, then you would go for the emblem or the flag. And the rationale for going for the emblem or the flag is to say, you know what, if I make a good emblem, there is a far less likely chance that I will replace that anytime soon. And even if it doesn't become my very best emblem, as long as it was a candidate to become my very best emblem, it's probably worth working on. Because in a worst case, maybe you'll use it on a second march. Sort of what I'm doing over here, okay? But I also think that in general, trying to make armaments better for your second march is not a good plan. Because the goal of making better armaments for your second or third march is trying to make something that you know for sure will be replaced if you ever get something better for your best march. Because you promote everything down and then something gets promoted out and your second best march is what's getting promoted out, right? So I think it is better to work on armaments for your best march overall. And these things are damn expensive, man. There's at 30 a pop. It's fine for my account where I'm spending. This is like obviously a whale's advantage. But if we look at an account where I just don't spend as much, okay, and that's my restart account, I do not have that many great candidates for armaments to even reroll in the first place. And so for a lot of people, they may look at this video and be like, I don't know, was this even a question for me? I only have like 5, inscribed legendaries anyways. I don't have that much to work with. And I totally get that, okay? And if that's your situation, then what you do is you pick the armament that's got the best inscription and you try to make it relevant to you. And if you can afford to do it at 1 transmutation stone a pop, that is obviously far more affordable than going the other way around and trying to really shoot the moon. 5 transmutation stones a pop, re-rolling something that I could take this assertive armament, spend 5 transmutation stones and get something better than siege stats. But remember, my chances of doing that and being successful, it's a, 14.4% chance, almost, not even. So that means, I don't know, I'm shooting from the hip here, but, I would expect to have to reroll 8 times to get maybe defense. Maybe. And I might not even get it. Maybe I'll get, I guess March speed for archers. I don't even want that. So, it's an expensive game to reroll these armaments. And I have a double inscription over here. This one happened to be just really good. Yikes. Right? I mean, even though these are low rolls, it's pretty good overall. So the inscription game is complicated. And if you're looking for videos and guides that help at least bring clarity to how they work and tries to simplify things, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to see my overall review of when Greece landed in game, I'll have a card in the end screen for that in just a second. And if you want to see just how lucky or unlucky you can get pulling armaments, even if you're spending a bunch of money, card will be in the end screen for that in just a second as well.